Picture this: January 15th, 2019. The temperature inside ADX Florence, America's most secure supermax prison, drops to a bone-chilling 45 degrees. We're talking about a facility that costs taxpayers $78 million annually to operate, housing terrorists, cartel leaders, and serial killers. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. No joke, this actually happened within 72 hours. These guys had developed the most sophisticated survival network federal investigators had seen in decades. And it wasn't just about staying warm. What you're about to see is behind-the-scenes access to classified federal investigation footage that reveals how America's most dangerous criminals turned a heating crisis into a contraband operation that completely bypassed every security protocol the Bureau of Prisons had in place. This is the story of how criminal ingenuity met American institutional strength and why the system always wins in the end. ADX Florence isn't your typical prison. This place makes Alcatraz look like summer camp. 490 cells of pure concrete and steel, designed by the same engineers who build missile silos. Each cell measures exactly 7 feet by 12 feet smaller than most people's bathrooms. The facility was constructed in 1994 at a cost of $60 million, using reinforced concrete walls 4 inches thick, designed to contain explosions. Temperature control runs through a centralized HVAC system, monitored 24/7 by computer systems worth more than most people's houses. When you remove basic human needs like warmth, you don't just create discomfort, you create innovation. And in a supermax environment, innovation equals security risk. The numbers tell the story. ADX Florence processes over 50,000 security data points every hour, maintains a zero-escape record since opening, and houses 147 of America's most dangerous criminals as of January 2019. But on January 15th, 2019, something happened that the engineers never planned for: a cascade failure that would expose vulnerabilities these inmates had been mapping for years. Let me walk you through what went wrong. The primary heating unit, a $2.3 million German-engineered system, suffered what investigators later called a cascade failure. Not just one component breaking down, but a domino effect that knocked out heating to 3 entire housing units. We're talking about 147 cells suddenly dropping from a regulated 68 degrees to whatever Mother Nature decided to throw at Colorado in the middle of winter. And these guys, they were ready. You've got to understand, these aren't regular inmates. We're housing terrorists, cartel leaders, and serial killers. A blanket isn't just a blanket, it's 72 square feet of material that could be turned into anything from a noose to a rope ladder. Federal regulations require additional blankets within 4 hours when heating fails. Standard protocol, right? Except ADX Florence doesn't stock extra blankets. Why? Because in a supermax facility, every piece of fabric is a potential weapon. So there they were, 147 of America's most dangerous criminals sitting in near-freezing cells with zero additional warmth coming their way. But here's where it gets interesting, and I mean interesting in the most terrifying way possible. Within 6 hours, something remarkable started happening. Federal investigators later discovered that inmates had immediately begun what they called thermal resource redistribution. Sounds fancy, right? What it actually meant was that these guys had figured out how to generate, capture, and share heat using nothing but standard-issue prison items. The first breakthrough came from Cell Block H, Unit 7. An inmate, we'll call him Subject 23, for security reasons discovered that concrete walls retained heat differently depending on their position relative to the building's core. Using a technique that would make any engineer proud, he began mapping thermal zones by pressing his body against different wall sections and timing how long each area stayed warm. But here's the genius part. He wasn't keeping this information to himself. These guys thought they were smarter than American engineering. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. What happened next would make a survival expert jealous, but it also revealed something federal authorities never anticipated. The communication method? Tapping codes on the plumbing pipes. Every cell in ADX Florence has a small sink and toilet connected to the same plumbing network. What the designers never anticipated was that these pipes could carry sound with remarkable clarity. What we observed was essentially a human heat distribution network. These individuals had created a communication system that allowed them to share thermal mapping data across multiple cell blocks, despite being in complete isolation. Inmates developed a tapping system, 3 short taps for warm zone identified, 5 long taps for heat source located, and complex sequences that could transmit specific cell coordinates. Within 12 hours, they had mapped the thermal characteristics of the entire facility, but mapping warm spots was just the beginning. These guys weren't content to just find heat, they were going to make it. Federal investigators discovered that inmates had developed 3 distinct heat generation methods using only items available in their cells. And when I say only items available, I mean they turned everyday prison supplies into a coordinated heating operation that would make a Navy SEAL instructor take notes. Method 1. Friction heating, using standard-issue socks and concrete floors. Inmates discovered that by rapidly rubbing cotton socks against concrete in specific patterns, they could generate enough heat to warm their hands for up to 20 minutes. But they didn't stop there. They figured out how to time these sessions, so multiple inmates were generating heat simultaneously, creating what thermal imaging later showed were heat pulses that traveled through the building structure. Method 2. Body heat amplification through controlled breathing and movement. This one's where it gets really sophisticated. Inmates developed a breathing technique similar to what Navy SEALs use in cold water survival that could raise their core body temperature by up to 3 degrees. They then used coordinated movement patterns performed in sync across multiple cells to generate collective body heat that actually affected the ambient temperature of entire cell blocks. Method 3, and this is the one that really got federal attention, improvised heat capture using metal components from their cells. Investigation, escalation, 3. We're not talking about individual survival techniques. This was a network operation. Inmates were timing their heat generation activities, sharing thermal data, and coordinating their efforts across multiple security zones. It was like watching a human heating system organize itself. Every ADX Florence cell contains a stainless steel sink, toilet, and light fixture. What inmates discovered was that these metal components could be used as heat conductors and storage devices. By pressing their bodies against the metal fixtures during the warmest part of the day when sunlight hit the building's exterior, they could transfer and store body heat in the metal, which would then slowly release that heat throughout the night. But the real breakthrough was coordination. These guys had turned survival into a science. What they didn't realize was that their ingenuity was about to expose something much bigger than a heating problem. On day 4 of the heating crisis, guards conducting routine cell inspections noticed something odd. Inmates who should have been suffering from cold exposure were not only surviving, they were thriving. Medical checks showed that core body temperatures were within normal ranges, and several inmates had actually gained weight during the crisis. That's when investigators realized they weren't just looking at survival techniques. They were looking at a sophisticated contraband operation that had been running for months, possibly years. The heat generation activities were real, but they served a dual purpose. They provided cover for an elaborate communication and resource-sharing network that had completely bypassed every security protocol at ADX Florence. Here's how it worked. The pipe-tapping communication system that inmates developed for sharing thermal data was actually an expansion of an existing code system they'd been using to coordinate contraband distribution. The heat mapping activities gave inmates legitimate reasons to move around their cells, test different locations, and maintain constant communication, all while appearing to simply try to stay warm. Federal investigators discovered that inmates had been using the metal fixtures in their cells not just for heat storage, but as hiding places for contraband items that had been smuggled in over months. The coordinated movement patterns weren't just for generating body heat, they were signals for contraband drops and pickups during meal delivery and guard rotations. Most shocking of all, the thermal mapping data that inmates were sharing through the pipe system included detailed information about guard patrol patterns, camera blind spots, and security vulnerabilities that they'd been collecting for over 2 years. What started as a response to a heating emergency revealed the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation we'd ever seen in a federal supermax facility. These inmates had essentially created a shadow communication network that operated parallel to all our security systems. System response, adaptation. But here's the thing about American institutional strength: it adapts. And when federal authorities realized what they were dealing with, the response was swift, comprehensive, and absolutely devastating to the inmates' operation. Within 48 hours of discovering the contraband network, the Bureau of Prisons implemented what they called Operation Thermal Reset. This wasn't just about fixing the heating system, it was about completely dismantling a criminal network that had operated undetected for years. First, They brought in thermal imaging specialists from the Department of Defense. These are the same experts who design heat detection systems for military operations. Using advanced infrared technology, they mapped every heat signature in the facility, identifying not just the inmates' heat generation activities, but also the contraband hiding spots that had been concealed in the metal fixtures. The results were staggering. Investigators found contraband items in 73 different locations throughout the facility. Items that had been missed by years of routine searches because they were hidden in thermally optimized locations that inmates had, identified through their heat mapping activities. But the real genius of the federal response was how they turned the inmates' own system against them. Instead of shutting down the communication network, federal investigators installed acoustic sensors in the plumbing system that could detect and decode the tapping patterns. Instead of simply shutting down the communication network, federal investigators decided to monitor it. They installed acoustic sensors in the plumbing system that could detect and decode the tapping patterns. Essentially, they turned the inmates' communication system into a surveillance tool. For 3 weeks, federal authorities listened to every message transmitted through the pipe network. They identified the leadership structure of the contraband operation, mapped the entire communication hierarchy, and gathered evidence of criminal activities that extended far beyond the prison walls. The operation culminated in coordinated raids that resulted in 23 additional federal charges against 15 inmates, the discovery of $47,000 worth of contraband, and the identification of 3 correctional officers who had been compromised by the network. These guys thought they were beating the system, but what they actually did was help us build a better system. Every technique they developed, every vulnerability they exploited, every communication method they created, it all became intelligence that made the entire federal prison system stronger. Justice served. Finale. So what happened to the inmates who thought they could outsmart the most secure prison in America? The federal investigation resulted in a comprehensive legal response that sent a clear message. Criminal ingenuity will always be met with superior institutional strength. 15 inmates received additional federal charges ranging from conspiracy to contraband smuggling to attempted escape. The sentences added an average of 12 years to their existing terms, years they'll serve in even more restrictive conditions. But the real justice came in systematic improvements. The Bureau of Prisons brought in engineers from Lockheed Martin, the same company that designs security systems for nuclear facilities. Their solution cost $12.7 million and represents the most advanced thermal security technology in the world. We realized that trying to prevent inmates from generating heat was like trying to prevent them from breathing. Instead, we designed a system that monitors and analyzes their thermal activities. Any unusual heat patterns, whether from friction heating, coordinated movement, or contraband concealment, triggers immediate investigation. The new system operates on distributed thermal zones, 147 individual heating elements that operate independently and are monitored by AI-powered systems that can detect temperature variations as small as 0.2 degrees. Most importantly, the new system eliminates the security vulnerabilities that inmates had exploited. The metal fixtures in each cell are now made from materials that don't retain heat. The plumbing system includes sound dampeners that prevent communication, and the heating elements are designed to maintain consistent temperatures regardless of external conditions. The Bureau of Prisons implemented new protocols based on lessons learned from the ADX Florence incident. These protocols have been adopted by maximum security facilities nationwide, creating a network of institutional knowledge that makes the entire federal prison system more secure. What these inmates didn't understand is that every time they try to outsmart the system, they make the system stronger. Their heat generation network taught us vulnerabilities we didn't know existed, and now those vulnerabilities are permanently closed. The 3 correctional officers who were compromised by the contraband network were terminated and face federal charges. Their cases serve as a reminder that institutional strength depends not just on technology and procedures, but on the integrity of the people who operate the system. Most significantly, the thermal monitoring technology developed for ADX Florence is now being implemented in high-security facilities across the country, creating a national network of thermal intelligence that makes coordinated criminal activities virtually impossible. System strength confirmation. Here's what you need to understand about American institutional strength. It's not just about building better walls or installing more cameras. It's about creating systems that learn, adapt, and evolve faster than criminal ingenuity can develop. Today, ADX Florence operates with thermal monitoring capabilities that would make NASA jealous. The facility processes over 50,000 thermal data points every hour, analyzing patterns that can identify everything from contraband concealment to coordinated escape planning. The current system at ADX Florence represents the most advanced thermal security technology in the world. It's not just monitoring temperature, it's analyzing human behavior through thermal signatures. Any attempt to recreate the 2019 network would be detected within minutes. But the real strength of the system isn't just technological, it's institutional. The Bureau of Prisons used the ADX Florence incident to completely overhaul training protocols for correctional staff nationwide. Officers now receive specialized training in thermal monitoring, acoustic surveillance, and behavioral pattern recognition. They learn to identify the early signs of coordinated inmate activities and respond with protocols that have been tested against the most sophisticated criminal minds in America. The result is a correctional system that's stronger, smarter, and more secure than ever before. Those inmates thought they were beating the system, but what they actually did was help us build a better system. Every technique they developed, every vulnerability they exploited, every communication method they created, it all became intelligence that made us stronger. The numbers tell the story. Since implementing the thermal monitoring protocols developed at ADX Florence, federal maximum security facilities have seen a 73% reduction in contraband incidents, an 84% improvement in early detection of coordinated inmate activities, and 0 successful escape attempts. But perhaps most importantly, the cost of these improvements, $47 million across all federal maximum security facilities, has been offset by reduced security incidents, lower staff turnover, and decreased legal liability. The system isn't just stronger, it's more efficient. The thermal monitoring technology and investigative techniques developed from this case are now standard across the federal prison system, creating a network of institutional knowledge that makes coordinated criminal activities virtually impossible to execute successfully. Closing thoughts. The story of how prisoners tried to beat the cold with 0 blankets isn't really about heating systems or survival techniques. It's about something much more fundamental: the ongoing battle between criminal ingenuity and institutional strength. What happened at ADX Florence in 2019 proves that American institutions don't just respond to criminal innovation, they anticipate it, analyze it, and ultimately defeat it through superior engineering, investigative expertise, and systematic improvement. Criminals will always try to find new ways to beat the system, but what they consistently underestimate is the system's ability to learn from their attempts and become stronger. Every criminal innovation becomes institutional intelligence. The inmates at ADX Florence thought they were clever. They developed sophisticated techniques, coordinated complex operations, and exploited vulnerabilities that had existed for years. But in the end, their ingenuity became the foundation for security improvements that make the entire federal prison system more effective. That's the reality of American institutional strength. It doesn't just contain criminal behavior, it learns from it, adapts to it, and ultimately uses it to build better systems that protect law-abiding citizens. The next time someone tells you that criminals are getting smarter, remember ADX Florence. Remember that every criminal scheme, no matter how sophisticated, ultimately makes our institutions stronger and our communities safer. Because in America, the system always wins. It just takes time to show criminals exactly how outmatched they really are. Today, ADX Florence continues to house the most dangerous criminals in America. But now, it does so with thermal monitoring systems that can detect a contraband operation before it begins, communication networks that turn criminal coordination into evidence, and security protocols that have been tested against the most ingenious criminal minds in the world. The heating works perfectly, the inmates stay warm, and the system stays one step ahead of anyone who thinks they can beat it. That's American institutional strength in action.